The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
It is a gracious process that he takes us to of conforming us to his image. And that journey, of course, isn't going to be complete until we're glorified with him. But the understanding that I belong to him and that I am precious to him as I am right now is the fact that that really nailed it for me.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Kori Morgan's writing has been featured in such publications as Shenandoah, SN Review, Blanket Sea, Agape Review, Switchback, Rubber Top Review, Cantos, and Clay Jar Review. She's the founder and chief literary strategist of Inkling Creative Strategies, an author services company that helps writers reach their full creative potential so they can impact and inspire readers. She's also a stalwart of the Habit membership. Her new book is Why I Dyed My Hair Purple and Other Unorthodox Stories. In it, she explores the integral role of the arts in her Christian testimony. In this episode, Kori and I discuss Flannery O'Connor, flash nonfiction, Kori's creative upbringing, the value of MFA programs, and the very different values of the Habit membership. Kori also addresses the question of why she dyed her hair purple. Kori Morgan, so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I am proud of your new nonfiction sort of memoir in flash nonfiction essays, Why I Dyed My Hair Purple and Other Unorthodox Stories.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just start with flash fiction. Right? Tell me about flash nonfiction. What is flash nonfiction?
Flash nonfiction is a name for very short essays that capture a particular moment in time with very vivid, very crucial details, and also some reflection on the significance of the event. Although that may be something that there's a lot of, that might be something that there isn't a whole lot of. But the idea is you're capturing a very particular moment with detail in your life experience, or maybe not your life experience. This is something that is new for me that I've just been experimenting with in writing about myself, but it's a very compact, true story. That's probably a definition that we can go with.
Very compact. Is there a word limit? Do we say if it's more than 1,000 words, it's not flash nonfiction anymore?
You know, I'm really not a fan of those parameters. I know that in the scope of my book, the longest one I think is 2,500 words. The shortest is about 500. So I like to think that any piece of writing is as long as the idea tells you it wants to be.
Yeah.
And I think that we can get like really strung up with labels and thinking that because we're trying to write a short story, we have to cut the story off somewhere or try to truncate it. Well,
Yeah.
that might not be what you're writing. You might be writing something that's a novella. And in doing
Yeah.
so, you're limiting yourself. So I'm
Yeah.
not really a big fan of labels, but yeah, I would conservatively say, anywhere from a few sentences maybe to 2,500 words.
Yeah. I guess what I'm just now putting together is the flash in flash fiction or flash nonfiction isn't necessarily that you write it in a flash of time, is that it portrays a flash of time. And
Yeah,
I guess I may be stating the obvious here that everybody who's ever got an MFA knows, but I don't have an MFA, so I'm just now learning this. So that's how this book is structured, as a series of flashes that add up to a life, or they don't add up to a whole life because there's plenty of things that you didn't write about in your life. Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Now you write a good bit in this book about your family, your parents. And I know at office hours recently in the Habit membership, we got on the subject of, growing up with creative parents or not creative parents. And you had some interesting things to say about what it was like to grow up with creative parents. So tell me about that.
So I grew up in Kent, Ohio, which is a college town with an interesting history, but it also has a lot of creativity involved, just kind of woven into the community. There's a really rich musical history. There's a very rich artistic history there. And my parents were kind of in the middle of all of that. My dad was in a rock band in the Akron, Ohio music scene in the early 1970s that figures prominently, a fictionalized version of it in a lot of my fiction.
Yeah.
And he actually played at the same time and in similar spaces as Glass Harp, which was Phil Keaggy's band that he was in before he became the Phil Keaggy that many of us know today. So he's a musician. He is a visual artist. He no longer performs professionally, but teaches drums now. My mother is a gifted education specialist, as well as a writer and an actress and a lot of other things. She's in her 70s and she has no desire to quit anything or retire anything. She loves everything she does. She's just passionate about what she does.
Yeah.
And I think that growing up in that environment where creativity was freely encouraged in the community in general, but also at home, taught me something very important about how valuable of a skill it is. And I think that I knew that it was special long before I knew that it comes from God. I wasn't raised in a Christian home, which is something that I get into a lot in the book. But I grew up surrounded by music and art, and my mom took me to plays a lot. And I was always telling stories and reading. And there was never any intimation that what I was doing was not worthwhile or not interesting. When I applied for college, it was just kind of a given that I was going to be an English major, and they helped me find the best place for me to go. And it was really just a blessing to have the two of them. Still is a blessing to have the two of them in my life. They were amazing mentors.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting in this book how often the arts are involved in some crucial development in your spiritual journey. I guess you'd say that's kind of what this book is about. It feels like, I don't know if that's if you'd agree with that summary, but it feels like, you read this book or you were in this play, or, you read Wise Blood, for instance, by Flannery O'Connor. I'd love to hear you say more about them. I mean, pick one or two of these moments, and talk about how God was extending himself to you through the arts when you didn't know that's what was happening. Or maybe you did know.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that that's a very important focus of the book, because a lot of people, and this is a topic that comes up quite a bit on your podcast, as well as the Rabbit Room and other circles like ours, a lot of people think that the arts and creativity and faith are separate spheres, that ne'er the two shall meet. And nothing could be further from the truth. The Lord Jesus Christ is the most creative person that ever has and ever will live. And I think that on its own is enough to stop that conversation right there. But yeah, I would say that my identity as an artistic person was something that God used because he knows our languages. He knows what to use in the world that's going to speak to us. And I think the first thing that immediately comes to mind is there's an essay in my book where I talk about being in a production of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And in that production, I played the dwarf. So I was the witch's head minion. And this was a big deal for me because when I did theater, I usually was cast as like the dopey third wheel best friend or the able retentive authority figure. Like, I don't know how I ended up in these roles, but I got to play somebody evil. And I had this costume with this big, shaggy, dark wig. And, they painted my teeth yellow. And it was great. It was so much, I got to walk weird. And, I had an accent that I developed for my character. And it was so much fun. And my favorite part of the play was where they execute or, believe that they've executed Aslan, because I got to leap all over the stage. I got to, get all the kids that were playing the wolves and the evil animals riled up. At one point, the director actually told me to tone it down because I was detracting from the main action, which was a problem. But I had so much fun being in this play. And then a few years back, I reread all the Narnia books for the first time since I was a kid. And, again, I wasn't raised in a Christian home, so I was reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe without all the backstory. I just thought it was a cool story about some kids going on an adventure and meeting a lion, who was a really nice guy. I didn't know anything about the subtext. But when I read the books again and I got to that scene in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I realized, oh my goodness, I, as a ninth grader who had been through some family trauma, was dealing with some mental health issues, had decided that God did not exist. I was acting out what was in my heart. When I was playing that role. And it was this amazing kind of means of grace when I realized that, because I was able to see where I was before the Lord drew me to himself and get a broader overview of what I had been saved from. So, I think that theater in particular kind of gets a bad rap where, people wonder in Christian circles, is this a valid use of your body, to pretend to be another person in situations that are often very difficult. I've heard those arguments thrown out. And I think that was an occasion where, playing that character, even though I didn't realize it at the time, I could see what the purpose for that was. That was a very, very powerful realization. The other one you already mentioned, and I guess we're going to get to Flannery O'Connor eventually, so we might as well talk about her now.
Might as well do it now.
So Wise Blood is my favorite novel, and it also is a book that the Lord used to make me realize that I'm a sinner and I am separated from him, and no amount of fake religious trappings, no amount of outward expression of my anger toward him is going to improve that situation. And reading that book was weird for me because it's about a guy who is rabidly atheistic. And I was, in a very perverse way, kind of comforted by Hazel Motes, because I thought, okay, I can relate to this character in a multitude of ways. It kind of lulled me into a sense of thinking I was okay. And then the end of the book came. And I realized that this character is a false prophet. Flannery O'Connor, as a devout Christian writing these stories, has a message that she is, as she herself said, shockingly trying to portray. Her message had hit me. And I knew that I had to do some serious rethinking about the ragged figure of Jesus moving from tree to tree in the back of my mind, as described it. So those are probably my two favorite examples.
Yeah. Hazel Motes is so interesting because it's well, you may disagree with this from your experience of the story, but I know when I read the book, kind of knowing where Flannery O'Connor was coming from, it was so obvious that he very much believed. He was such a rabid atheist because he was trying to get away from what he believed, not that he didn't believe it.
Ooh, I've actually never thought about that before. I think that, no, that's amazing. And now I want to read the book again for the umpteenth time. No, I actually really love that because it casts the book in a much more hopeful light that reading does. Yeah. And I know that there are a lot of debates about exactly how hopeful is this story. And, perhaps my reading of it is me, reading my experience into the story, which I don't necessarily think Flannery O'Connor would have a problem with.
Right.
But I do, wow, I love it.
Yeah.
That is such a beautiful observation, and I want to read the book again.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying. You say somewhere in the book the idea of you didn't believe in God, but you're also mad at God. Like, and there's something about this tendency, this desire to have it both ways. To not believe, but also to be mad at somebody you don't believe in. And I feel like the Wise Blood does a really good job of capturing that idea. That he knows that ragged figure is tracking him tree to tree, and he's trying to get away, which is different from not believing. So, yeah.
Well, see, what's interesting about that is that I ran away a while longer after I had that realization. I think I just wanted to ignore it because there were a lot of things. I think one thing that's really unusual about my story is that I became a Christian when I was in college, which is when people who were raised in Christian families are usually running away to other things that are, the wisdom of man and that are not of God. And I very much became a Christian as a result of being in the environment that I was in college. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there were a lot of things that were coming at me from multiple directions and various friends that the Lord placed in my life. And there were a lot of factors. I
love the story about that you were writing a novel about the Carter family, the first family of country music, and you'd gotten their faith all wrong, and a Christian friend sat you down and said, "Okay, I'm not trying to convert you, but here's some things you need to know if you're going to write this book."
And that's what I'm talking about is the way that I became a Christian is so tied up in my writing and, the language of music and literature and the performing arts that I'd grown up with. And, which makes sense because my parents, we talked about them earlier. When I was growing up, they wanted to feed that creative impulse that I had, and they wanted to show me this is a good thing. This is not something to be ashamed of, which is, I was the subject of some bullying at school, and they wanted me to know that that was not something to be ashamed of. And, I think about all the times in scripture where it talks about how God wants to give us every good and perfect gift. And, if our own families, if my own family gives me those things, how much more should my heavenly Father want to nourish those things that he's put into me as good works that he's prepared for me?
Yeah, that's good. Can you talk to me about one idea that's just permeates the whole story is this idea of you being an outsider, not fitting in, kind of in a lot of different situations, and books and the arts being a way for you to cope as a person who found yourself on the outside. Let's start with, I think you were in second grade, got in trouble for reading during recess instead of playing with your peers.
Yes. I was a discipline problem in kindergarten. I could already read by the time I got to kindergarten. Perks of having a mom who's a gifted education specialist. I think I
Yeah.
might have been the guinea pig for a lot of her stuff that she was studying and that she was using in her classroom. So
Yeah.
I could read. I mean, we didn't have coloring books or anything like that at our house because she wanted to encourage me to draw my own pictures and to
Uh-huh.
imaginatively come up with my own illustrations. So
Okay.
I got to kindergarten, and I honestly, it was kind of like that school that Eustace and Jill go to in the silver chair. It was very formulaic. It was very
Uh-huh.
going to do this activity at this point. We're now going to give you this picture of a farm to color. Now we're going to give you some popsicle sticks and you're going to build a house.
Yeah.
And I was so bored. I was so bored. Like I went from being with my dad in his art studio and helping him and doing things like that all the time to being with these people who said, you're going to do this now, and the thing that you're going to do isn't even fun. So
Yeah.
I started bringing my toy dinosaurs and my action figures to school with me and sitting in the corner and telling my stories. I took books in the bathroom with me to read because I just wanted to be away from everybody. Like
Yeah.
it was noisy and they were all doing boring things. And I was just like, yeah, this is not going to work. So I was a discipline problem in kindergarten, and then I went to elementary school. And when my teacher called my mom and said, "Hey, your daughter's wandering around on the playground talking to herself and reading books to herself, and we're a little worried." Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of been this thing, that's woven into me. And then, now today I sit in a room by myself and I tell stories.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's interesting how all of that goes. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if I hadn't had parents that understood how much I loved being creative, it could have gone a
Mhm.
completely different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And luckily, the other thing I'll mention is that I did have a teacher who, once he recognized what was going on, he actually opened up opportunities for me to bring what I was writing into class.
Yeah.
And, he encouraged me to write the stories that I was walking around talking to myself, telling down. And then,
Yeah.
I get to share them with the class. And,
And that was the shortcut to popularity, I guess.
no. Oh, wait, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Everyone wanted to be my friend. No, they didn't. So yeah, I mean, it definitely is a theme throughout the entire book because yeah, I don't really fit in a box. And praise God that he doesn't want any of us, who belong to him to fit in a box.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I said, nobody who has ever lived will be as creative as the Lord Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
And he, as the agent behind the creation of all things, knows what he is doing when he gives each of us the particular skills and passions he gives us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a burning question that comes up even just in the title, why did you dye your hair purple, Kori?
So it actually ties into that discussion of being a misfit and, standing out. And ironically, I didn't really dye my hair purple because I felt that it would be a solution to bullying. It was more so because I wanted to draw attention to things that people were not noticing. So in that particular story, I talk a little bit about my extremely interesting church history that my
Yeah.
husband and I have been through. It's quite, there were a lot of problems. And in this one particular congregation we were a part of, it was very legalistic. There were a lot of very strict ideas about what a Christian does and does not do. Nobody ever directly said the phrase, you can lose your salvation, or, Jesus saves you, but you have to do your part. But
Mhm.
it was, you don't need to say that out loud. You can
Yeah.
say it with your actions. And
Yeah.
there was a lot of dismissing of me because I didn't write Christian fiction, or because, at the time anyway, I was in academia and I was teaching. And,
Mhm.
they felt that there were things that I could be doing that would be better serving the Lord than, being in creative and academic spaces. There were,
Yeah.
there were a whole host of things. Many of them involved things that were out of my control. which were extremely hurtful. But I was at the time dealing with a lot of anger about that. And one morning I overheard some people talking about having daughters with attention-seeking behaviors or, other teen drama problems. And one of them said, my daughter just dyed her hair pink. I told her that if God wanted to make you that way, he would have given you pink hair. So I heard that and something clicked in my head and I thought, oh, it's on. It's like, you want to do this, you want to try to dismiss the fact that I'm not like you. Watch me do this. So I chopped off all my hair and I dyed it purple.
Yeah.
And, I showed up on Sunday with my purple hair and, mauve lipstick. And I think I had like gold flecked eyeshadow on or something. My husband thought it looked great. I mean, I don't think he really picked up on the subtext of what I was doing. But yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, people were acknowledging the fact that I was different. And, none of this was things that were conscious to me when that incident actually happened. That realization didn't come until later. But I think
I'm sorry, what realization didn't come until later?
The realization that I was trying to seek the attention that I felt people weren't giving me.
Yeah.
So what I realized later, and this is the more that I read Flannery O'Connor, the more that some things kind of clicked. I think that I was making myself into a large and startling figure. I mean, she famously said that when you are writing for people who agree with you, that is when, she as a Christian writing to other Christians, when you are writing to those people, you can relax a little bit and you don't have to worry so much. But when you are talking to an audience of people who don't believe in God, you need to make your message apparent by shock. And I think that that's what I was trying to do. I just desperately wanted to be seen for what I was and not some kind of clean cut, version of myself without sharp edges that I felt that I was trying to be conformed into.
Yeah.
So,
you made yourself into a large and startling image.
I did. Yeah. And it's like you want to look at me in a way that is diminishing to, who I am, then I'm going to show you, what it is that you're diminishing. And I mean, a theme that I think comes up a lot in the book is that I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. I mean, when I was a kid who was wandering around on the playground, I wanted to be like everybody else. I mean, I wanted to be able to suppress that aspect of myself and just go play kickball already. But I didn't know how to do that. And I don't know how to lie about who I am. I've never been good at that. So, and I mean, the church of all places is where you should not have to lie. And I think the fact that I was being forced to do exactly that in that setting was incredibly heartbreaking for me. I will add that that situation ended about 8 years ago. We're no longer at that congregation. We're someplace much healthier and much more doctrinally sound. And so I just want to throw that out there for anybody that's concerned. But I think that the purple hair is such a metaphor for what many people feel like they have to do. And just to clarify, I'm not here to say that if you dye your hair, like you're having a cry for help. I'm not here to say that. I mean, I think I want.
Sounds like in your case, it was some sort of cry for help.
I was. Yes.
Doesn't mean everybody.
That's not everybody. This is not an argument against that. I think I wanted to believe that I was being creative and theatrical, individualistic or whatever. But
well, one thing that struck me about that particular essay is that you said when you look back at that picture, what you see is mostly sadness. The young woman with the purple hair and the mauve lipstick and the gold flecked. Who's trying to be out there. Now, looking back on it, it's more sad than whatever, than it's not a declaration of freedom. And a cry for help is there can be, I guess there can be a a fine line between a cry for help and a declaration of freedom. And
Yeah.
but I love the fact that you have found a way for your individuality for you to live into that individuality without necessarily it being a function of a haircut or a lipstick color or whatever. But it's your own, what is unique about you is coming from the inside. And I'm so glad you've found a way to live into that.
I think the important thing to emphasize in addition to that is that it really isn't so much knowledge of myself as it is knowledge of who Jesus Christ actually is. And the fact that, salvation is not a work of our own.
Mm-hmm.
It is entirely of him. It is entirely by his grace. And it is a gracious process that he takes us to of conforming us to his image. And that journey, of course, isn't going to be complete until we're glorified with him. But the understanding that I belong to him and that I am precious to him as I am right now is the fact that that really, really nailed it for me. And being able to be a part of a congregation that actually emphasizes the character of God in a way that is biblical, as opposed to intimating that there are things that we need to do or else we're going to lose our salvation or God is going to give up on us. And that is such a heartbreaking way to teach people about God. I mean, for one thing, it's a lie. And when you say that there's anything that we contribute to our salvation, you're lying about who God is. But my identity in him is the main thing. And I feel like once I've been able to center on that, everything else flows from that.
Yeah. So are you aware of ways that sort of alignment with reality, with that theological alignment, has changed the way you do creative work?
I think that probably the most important way that has intersected with my creativity is the way that God has used community as a way to give me a word picture of the way that he works with me in using my gifts. And I guess that's where the habit comes in because I've been a member since 2000. I jumped on board during writing with
Not 2000.
Yeah, 2000. No, not 2000. 2020. Oh my goodness. Wow. Oh wow. I just took myself way back. 2020.
2020. Yes.
2020, the year of the pandemic. That misspeaking is a metaphor for how badly the pandemic messed with our sense of time.
That's right.
So during the pandemic, when I was shut at home, I saw a Facebook ad for a class on Flannery O'Connor, and I thought, gee, I'm laid off from work. I can't go anywhere. This is great.
Yeah.
So I took the class, and it was wonderful because I had never been in a class that taught Flannery O'Connor from a Christian point of view before.
Uh-huh.
I had, of course, read her work from that perspective on my own. Yeah. But I had never really thought in that kind of depth about the way that, her work intersects with biblical thought. And those studies that sent me down, really kind of lit me up. So I loved the community that I found in talking about Flannery with people, of course, but also sharing my writing. And I liked it so much that I decided to stay. Yeah. And I like to call Why I Dyed My Hair Purple a group project. My habitué friends, because there are so many people in our community that have touched this book.
Yeah.
I was trying to, when I wrote my acknowledgments, I was trying to put together some kind of a list, and it just kept getting longer and longer. And there are just so many people who contributed to this that it's insane. Yeah. And I think that when God guides us to people who are going to help iron sharpen iron and help us to grow as creative people, he's giving us a picture of what he wants to do with us on an individual level. And I think that one thing that I learned about community is that it is creative, but it's also generous. And the habit is full of the most kind and generous and loving people that I've ever met in terms of
I agree. There's incredible people there.
yeah, in terms of how creativity is practiced. And I mean, it's been life changing. And this book doesn't exist without that community. And I think that it is such an amazing picture of how God uses events to bring us together with the people that we're meant to connect with.
Yeah.
And, the fact that, that connection happened because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just shows God can take something that resulted in so much isolation and use it to bring us into community with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, can you speak real quickly to the idea? You have an MFA.
Yes.
There aren't a ton of people in the habit world that have an MFA, and I didn't major in creative writing and never got an MFA. You both majored in creativity in undergraduate and got an MFA, right?
Yes.
And I often get people asking questions about, is an MFA worth it? Is it a good idea? And I don't really know what to say. So when people ask you about an MFA, I know there's things that were great about it for you, things that maybe weren't as great. How do you assess the value of an MFA at this point, now that you're, a few years out from it? I mean, 10, 15 years out from it, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So I graduated from West Virginia University from their wonderful MFA program. And I would say that if you are somebody who wants to be in the academic world, if you're somebody who wants to teach college, if you think that being in an environment like that, in a scholarly environment, would help you to have your writing be enriched, if you want to be in workshops, if you want, constant structure for, getting your writing done, then I would say that it would be a fit for you. I would not recommend going unless you can get funding. The reason why I was able to go was because I got an assistantship, which basically meant that my tuition was paid and I taught freshman English. And so, which is a worthwhile opportunity. If you are able to get funding. I think that one thing that is different now than when I was in my MFA program is that there are so many communities like The Habit that can open up doors for you to have the same kind of community aspect as the MFA program. And, especially with The Habit, be able to take classes and be able to have an academic aspect to what you're doing, but not have it be, something that is going to cost you thousands of dollars. Yeah. So there are many options, I think, out there now that were not out there when I was in my MFA program. And would I get an MFA today if I were graduating college now? I don't know. I don't know. I do know that there would be a lot of opportunities, say, if I did not get funding. But for those that do pursue an MFA, you can expect a lot of rigorous workshopping. Yeah. And you can expect to be dedicated to your classmates' work as well as to your own writing. I mean, I think that's one thing that really prepared me very well for The Habit is, when you're required for every workshop to come with a marked up copy of your colleague's essay or story, along with a letter outlining your particular thoughts on their work, and then sit in class and dissect it for an hour. Yeah. I think that, that makes it, it's a relatively small ask to go on the forums and comment on people's work. But,
well, I know that the act of thinking hard about somebody else's work and giving them generous feedback is really beneficial for the person who is giving the feedback, not just the person who's receiving it. I think we come into these situations like, I'm going to get some good feedback, and you find that you get as much from giving the feedback as you do from receiving.
Absolutely.
Feedback. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that I do, of course, with Inkling Creative Strategies, which is a company that I run that helps writers reach their full creative potential so they can impact and inspire readers. I do a lot of editing with my clients. I do a lot of, commenting on manuscripts that they don't really know what to do with. And I really enjoy writing the letters. Like everybody gets a letter where I talk about what really brought me into the story and inspired me, but also what made me confused or made me want more information.
Yeah.
And it's really, I am delighted to do that for people.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful way to minister to writers.
Yeah. Well, you have this vague sense of how stories work, and then when you have to write one of those letters, you have to. It's not vague anymore. It's real specific, and you learn so much by getting making those vague ideas specific in those letters. So I know I end up writing some editorial letters for various projects, and it's so helpful to me, and hopefully it's helpful to the people I write the letters to. But okay, we got to wrap this thing up. But I want to hear from you. Who are the writers that make you want to write, Kori Morgan?
Well, not Flannery O'Connor, obviously.
Okay.
No, definitely Flannery O'Connor, but two others come to mind. The first is Mark Brzaitis. He is the director of the Master of Fine Arts program at West Virginia University,
gotcha. Okay.
and is my longtime mentor and friend. I would recommend Mark's short story collection, The Incurables.
Okay.
It's a collection of linked stories about a community that has many characters drawn together by the theme of mental illness and how that impacts their lives. It is a beautiful, heartbreaking read. That and any of Mark's books are just incredible.
How do you spell his last name, by the way?
Brazaitis.
Okay.
So yeah, he's fantastic. The other writer that makes me want to write, kind of an odd pick, Nancy Griffith, the folk singer.
Yeah.
She did write a novel.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she did. It was released a year after her death. She apparently bequeathed the manuscript to a good friend and said, "Do what you have to do to get this out in the world."
Wow.
And so Two of a Kind Heart. It's out there. That was such a gift to be able to read that. But her songs are, I mean, she traverses worlds and decades in 3 to 4 minutes with characters that are so incredibly well drawn. And
the only album of hers that I really know is the one that's all covers. And I love that, the Other Voices, Other Rooms. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that record. And I thought they were all Nancy Griffith. I mean, I thought they were mostly Nancy Griffith songs until relatively recently, And but it also, but once I found out they were all covers, I then didn't know anything about her writing life. And so I'll have to find out more about her writing.
Last of the True Believers is where I always tell people to start.
All right. Noted. All right, Kori, thanks so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun. It's always great to talk to you.
Thank you. It's always great to talk to you as well. Thanks for the opportunity.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.